of these medical records is very, very important when somebody is hurt at work, or if they have a lawsuit against somebody that ran a red light and caused a car accident or a slip and fall, or something like that. So the accuracy of these medical records is extremely important. And when I was contacted by Karen about this subject, I was excited to talk about it. It's not a great, super interesting topic, but nevertheless, it's relevant to my practice of law. And the accuracy of these medical records largely influence the outcome of these cases. As an EMT, you will be the first medical professional to document the accident that potentially would happen to one of your patients. So, for example, if somebody gets hurt at work, the timeliness of reporting and documenting injuries is the single most influential factor in determining whether somebody's workers' comp claim is going to be accepted or contested. Now, the contents of these records are important to the extent that, one, you want to document what's called the mechanism of injury. Okay. So, if somebody stepped on a piece of glass and cut their foot, that would be a mechanism of injury. If somebody was in a car accident and had a whiplash type movement of their head and neck, that's a mechanism of injury. And so documenting the mechanism of injury is very, very important for, any medical litigation, and probably also to the practice of medicine. For example, a whiplash injury, an orthopedic is going to understand the dynamics of a whiplash type motion, and that would help them understand what type of treatment to prescribe. Okay. But in litigation, it's important because, like, for example, in the workers' comp system, there's legitimate people, there's people that are, exaggerating, or maybe trying to get their health insurance. Maybe they don't have health insurance, so they're trying to get workers' comp to pay for something. So the workers' comp doctors and insurance companies are very skeptical about how these people were injured. So if you properly document the mechanism of injury, that will help this injured worker obtain the medical treatment that they need. Okay, so the reason why the mechanism is important is because in any sort of medical litigation, you have to connect the injuries that the person is alleging to have occurred from the accident to the accident. So, if you have a whiplash injury, then that causes, range of motion deficits, and it can cause, neurological problems in the upper extremities. So if somebody is complaining about a stiff neck or neck pain and they had a car accident with a whiplash type mechanism of injury, that really helps the doctors connect the symptoms and injuries to the accident, thereby obligating that particular insurance company to pay for that injured worker. So mechanism of injury is very, very important. The other thing that's important is to document every single injury that the person has as soon as possible following the accident. Now, in your guys' situations, you're going to be in emergency situations. So, listen to Karen as far as, how to triage those types of things. Medical documentation is important, but, saving a life is way more important than that. So, I suppose you're going to have to figure out, if the person's bleeding to death, obviously, you're going to document that. But are you also going to document that they have, another symptom from a less significant injury? So, but for the injured party in their litigation, documenting all of those injuries as close in time to the actual accident as possible will help that person obtain medical treatment and benefits through either the workers' comp system or through their lawsuit against the guy that ran the red light. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're documenting every single body part as soon as possible, every body part that was injured, taking into account your triage and whatnot, okay? And then from that, also documenting the symptoms is very important as well, okay? So if somebody has numbness in their arm, that would be really an important symptom to document if somebody has a whiplash injury from a car accident. Okay. And then the other thing that's also very important to document are any sort of marks that the person would have on their person. So if they have, like I have a traumatic brain injury case right now that's in litigation, and the insurance company is basically arguing that my guy is faking his brain injury. Well, after the accident, he had a rather substantial laceration on the back of his head. And fortunately, somebody took a photograph of that. So we're going to go to court with that photograph and say, hey, this guy's not faking his injury. Here's a laceration on his head. This photograph was taken, an hour after the accident in the emergency room. Okay. So you want to document mechanism of injury, every body part that was injured, every symptom, and document lacerations, bruising, abrasions, and things like that. Okay. Any sort of, for example, with the concussion, if you can if they have dilation in their eyes, well, that's important to document because that's an objective finding. And, in medical litigation, we deal with objective medical evidence versus subjective. So, a laceration would be something that's objective because you can see it, you can feel it. Pain is subjective. Okay. Well, one person's on a pain scale of 0 to 10, one person's 7 might be another person's 10. So when we're dealing with medical litigation, objective medical evidence is extremely important because it is very common for insurance companies to accuse these people of having psychologically generated pain and so forth. Okay. One thing I forgot to mention yesterday, Karen, that I suggest that you bring up to your students, what I've seen a lot with the computerization of medical records is there's a lot of boilerplate medical records these days. Okay. So if the doctor, has his computer in front of him and he's got all these boxes to check, what I find is that a lot of doctors, and they don't seem to spend a lot of time going through all those forms and making sure that the information is accurate. Maybe the first exam information is put into that report, and then that same information carries over to every subsequent report. That wouldn't necessarily be an issue with an EMT because you guys are only seeing these people one time, but I see a lot of misinformation in boilerplate medical records, Karen. So I don't know if that really applies to you guys or not, but that's something that I've seen, and I forgot to mention that yesterday.
And actually, we saw a video on that about you need to go back through and make sure that the times are accurate and that everything you're putting in is accurate, because it does carry forward. Just like in the doctor's ones, we'll see vital signs at 5 minutes and we'll see vital signs at 10 minutes and 15, and everything will carry forward. And if you don't go back and check, they all come up at the same time.
Okay.
It looks like you've done something 3 times at one point instead of 3 separate times.
So. Yeah. And, one of the questions was, can you go back and fix reports if you think you messed up and want to change it? I think what I said yesterday was, that would probably depend upon the policy of your employer. However, I think absolutely you should change it. And I do encourage my clients when there's misinformation in reports to cordially address their doctors and ask them to fix that. Okay. So, one of the things that makes medical records, and especially, the EMT report and the emergency room report, is that, in the law, we have what are called contemporaneous recordings. A contemporaneous recording is something that you document as you're doing it. Okay. So, some doctors will be in the exam room, and as they're asking questions, they're typing the answers on their computer. That would be the most contemporaneous. Or if you were taking notes as you're trying to save a patient, obviously you can't probably do that, I'm guessing. So then the second closest thing to that would be maybe you go back and do your notes after you drop the person off at the emergency room, or if you're a doctor after you leave the exam room. But the closer in time that you can document the information to closer in time to the actual event happening, the more credible that medical evidence becomes. Okay. And so that's something to keep in mind. And then those contemporaneous recordings can later become what are called past recollections recorded. So if a doctor is testifying in a deposition 2 years after he did a surgery that was, from a workers' comp claim, what's he going to do? He's going to look at his medical record and see what he wrote 2 years ago, because that's probably the only thing that he has to remember. Okay. So anyway, the closer in time that you can document these things to when the incident occurs, the more credibility you're going to have, and the more credible, or the more accurate your information is going to be. Let's see here. One of the questions was where do the documents go? So what happens is, obviously, other doctors maybe in the hospital will look at your report or other medical reports to help, decide what to do or make informed decisions. But after, once the litigation starts, then basically what happens is the attorneys on each side of the case will request the medical records, and or in the insurance company, like the workers' comp insurance company or the at-fault driver's insurance company. And then these records are reviewed to sort of come up with a history of what happened to this person's case. In workers' comp, what happens a lot of times is these records get circulated to other doctors because they got in an accident, they took an ambulance ride to the hospital, so there's an emergency room record. And then when they get out of the hospital, they go to the workers' comp doctor, who refers them to an orthopedic and maybe a neurologist or a pain management doctor or something like that. All of these doctors are reviewing the other doctors' reports, including the EMS reports. So the more accurate these records are, the better decisions these doctors can make later. And if there's an inaccuracy in an EMS report or any other medical report, as that inaccurate report gets circulated to other doctors, that inaccuracy gets repeated over and over and over. Okay, so inaccurately documented medical information can become a virus in a person's case, not a literal virus, a figurative virus, and it can contaminate somebody's case. Okay, like, it used to be that loss of consciousness was a really big deal with traumatic brain injuries. It still is, but it used to be, well, if they didn't lose consciousness, then their brain injury couldn't be that bad. So if as an EMT, you check the wrong box and say there was no loss of consciousness, when in fact there was, that's a material fact that is extremely important in traumatic brain injury litigation. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. Before I start talking about liability of EMTs, I wanted to see if there's any other documentation questions. The length of the report, usually an EMT report is 2 to 4 pages. Usually the meat of that report might be, 5 or 6 sentences about, arrived at scene of car accident, person was, unconscious, so there may not be like this long dissertation of an EMT report, but usually they're 3 to 4 pages. And then, what happens is, in litigation, sometimes these reports get sent to doctors who will review, a stack of medical records, and then they'll do a medical chronology. So depending upon what type of doctor you are and what you're doing, I've seen medical reports that are as long as 100 pages.
Yeah, you were talking about one yesterday that was 98 pages.
Yeah, so
What
we
was the
have,
context on that one?
that was the one where the guy has the brain injury and he had the laceration on his head, and they're saying that he's faking his injury. And he has seen 7 different independent medical examiners. His file is probably 24 inches tall and of medical records. But yeah, so we hired this brain injury specialist to do an independent medical exam. And so he reviewed, 24 inches of medical records and then did his own exam, his own, findings and opinions, and answered questions that we had sent to him, which are called interrogatories. So in that case, yeah, that report was almost 100 pages long. Um, and so let's see, what else as far as documentation? Um,
So if you'd like to ask him a question about documentation, unmute yourself, or you can type in the chat room. I have temporarily lost my chat, but I will find it.
any questions on the documents? I mean, they're not, it's not the fun part of your job, but it's extremely important because you're taking a snapshot of this person's medical condition at that point in time. And because it is so close to the time of the accident, your report is going to be extremely important. Okay. Because every other doctor is going to look back to your report and that emergency report as the initial snapshot of what happened. Okay. And if body parts are left out then of the report, then it's going to be difficult for that individual to get that body part treated later. He's not going to be able to get the insurance company to pay for it. So if you have a neck, an elbow, and a wrist injury, and you only complain about the EMT only documents the neck, it's not going to be covered by that insurance company. Okay. As far as like the legal education goes, I have a finance degree, which was 4 years, bachelor degree, and then I went to 3 years of law school. So I have 7 years of college. And then the summer after I graduated from law school, I studied for the bar, basically the second half of May, all of June. I took my bar in basically just before July 4th, and then I got my results in September. So, the whole process of becoming a lawyer probably takes about 7.5 years, if starting with your first day of law school, and then, you're going to be applying for law school a year before that. I got my start. A friend of mine that was a workers' comp attorney in Fort Collins asked me to come work with him, and I got involved with that. Prior to that, I was doing like divorce and real estate and stuff like that. But the workers' comp and the car accident law I really enjoy because I'm helping people, and so I make money to help people. So it's kind of awesome that way. There's a lot of attorneys that are on, different types of law. There's different moral implications. Obviously, if you're an insurance defense attorney versus, a plaintiff's attorney, or a criminal defense attorney versus a prosecutor. So I really do enjoy the workers' comp and the auto accident stuff. Personal injury law encompasses things like basically anything that involves negligence. Okay. So, a car accident, somebody ran a red light, that's negligent. They caused an injury. Okay. So they get sued. Or maybe somebody manufactures a bogus medication that causes injury. So, those are what are called products liability cases. Or maybe like a defective vehicle or something like that causes accidents. Those are called products liability cases. And then you have what are called premises liability cases, which are like slip and falls. Somebody forgot to put a sign up after they mopped the floor outside of the bathroom and somebody fell. that's what's called a premises liability case. Or maybe somebody had a dangerous condition on their property, like maybe a failed board in a deck or something, somebody falls through a deck. Those are called premises liability cases. Medical malpractice is considered part of the personal injury practice. Now, a lot of the questions that I have seem to revolve around students being nervous about getting sued if they become an EMT. And so, that would probably fall under the category of medical malpractice. But it comes down to, the standard of negligence. Okay. And basically negligence occurs when a person breaches their duty to act reasonably, thereby causing an injury. Okay. So in your practice as an EMT, Karen is teaching you how to become an EMT. She's helping you learn what we call the standard of care. Okay. Now, the standard of care is something that is determined by medical professionals. If you have, a broken leg, then you take an x-ray and then you reset the bone and then you put it in a cast. So typically what your liability is going to be whether you have met the standard of care. Okay. What is an EMT supposed to do if somebody has, I don't know, hypoxia? Well, we give them oxygen. So whatever that standard of care is, as long as you're meeting that standard of care, you're really meeting your legal obligations. Now, obviously, there's other legal obligations like, medical confidentiality and, things like that. Okay. But from a negligence standpoint, if you're meeting your standard of care, then you are not acting negligently. Okay. Now, the other thing that I think, first of all, I don't think you guys should be worried about getting sued. Okay. I think if you want to get into EMT, I encourage you to do that. I think anytime somebody unselfishly pursues a profession where they're helping other people, like I just said, I really like my job because I'm helping people. I think by helping people in emergent situations, you're choosing a fantastic profession, whether it be an EMT, a nurse, a doctor, a CNA or whatever. And so, but most of you, well, probably all of you are going to be working for a hospital or a ambulance service. Okay. So your employer is going to insure you. Okay. Your employer is going to have liability insurance. So if something did happen when you were an EMT and there was a mistake that was made, I mean, the chances that you're going to, have to defend that lawsuit, probably are very low because that insurance company that insures your employer is going to provide you with an attorney that is going to defend that lawsuit. And, plaintiff's attorneys like me, we're looking for deep pockets. So if you work for, UCH ambulance and you're making 50 grand a year as an EMT, who do you think I'm going to come after? I'm going to go after the hospital because they have millions of dollars. I'm not going to be going after the young EMT that, doesn't have millions of dollars. So I think I wouldn't particularly worry about getting sued. I think what you need to worry about is studying hard, being prepared, learning your profession because people's lives depend upon it. And you want to sleep at night, so you're going to be as prepared as you possibly can and do the best possible job you can so that when you come home at night, you know that you did the best you could. Okay? So I think as long as you focus on that, I don't think you'll have too much to worry about liability-wise. One of the cases that people asked me about an interesting case, and I talked about this case yesterday. Probably my most interesting case that I've had involved an EMT that his wife was also an EMT, and he was exposed to carbon monoxide on the job. And as he was driving home after work, he lost consciousness and was involved in a fatal car accident. It was a really interesting case because nobody really knew what happened initially when he passed. Nobody knew why he fell asleep. And then when the autopsy report came out, it was revealed that he had carbon monoxide poisoning. And there was all sorts of fascinating things that were involved in that case. One of the things that was interesting was the body of the deceased didn't have very much blood left in it after he passed. And so they had to get blood samples off of the, asphalt. And they had very, very, very minute blood samples. And the blood samples were sent to a forensic lab in Pennsylvania that handles like really high profile murder cases and so forth. And they were able to determine that this person, based upon these sort of contaminated blood samples, had a high level of carbon monoxide. And so when we got the autopsy report, the wife went over to the ambulance station where her husband had been suspiciously exposed to carbon monoxide, and the ambulance station was in the process of taking down this heater that was the suspected source of the carbon monoxide. And because my client, who was the widow, she figured out that this heater was the source of the problem. There had been some problems with the heater before. And so we obtained an order from the workers' comp judge to have the emergency or the ambulance service preserve the heater so that it wouldn't be tampered with, kind of like a chain of custody thing in a criminal case. If you get evidence, it goes into a bag and it's labeled, and it goes into a room in the back of the police station. Well, the ambulance service disregarded the order from the court to not tamper with the heater, and we later figured that out several months later when there had been a change in attorneys on the insurance side of the case, and the new attorney didn't know what he had and sent us records evidencing that they had tampered with this heater. So once we figured that out, we were able to get a pretty good settlement. But that was a very interesting case. It lasted over 2 or 3 years. It was highly technical, and it involved an EMT. So I thought you guys might find that interesting. But there's a lot of different types of ways people get injured and so forth. So, there's been some interesting mechanisms of injury. But out of respect for my clients, I don't think we should be talking about that kind of stuff. So, is there any? One of the most common cases was one of the questions. The rear end car accident is probably, as far as my car accident litigation goes, that is the most frequent type of case. So half the cases that I have are people, innocently sitting at a stoplight, and then the person behind them is on their cell phone and they get rear-ended. So that is the most common type of car accident case that I have. And as far as workers' comp cases go, the most common injuries that I see are CNAs that are in nursing homes that are trying to, transfer patients, whether it be from bed to wheelchair or, wheelchair to toilet and back, or whether it be, sometimes they get injured. These people will fall on them, but this is relevant to your practice because you guys are doing transfers. Okay. Now you're probably not going to have the mechanical lifts and so forth that they have in the nursing homes, but usually these CNAs are females, and they're moving large people like me. I weigh 250 pounds. So imagine being, like a 135-pound woman trying to move a 250-pound man that's maybe disabled and can't really stand on his own or whatever. So what I will tell you is learn how to do transfers. Like, you do not want to get hurt doing a transfer. most of these people that get hurt doing transfers injure their lumbar spine. And, you know, these lumbar spine injuries are debilitating. And people live with chronic pain for the rest of their lives. So, you know, I would suggest that when Karen is teaching you how to do a transfer, that you pay attention. And I would also encourage all of you to be in the best physical condition you can be to do this job, because if you're doing transfers, you know, you're at high risk for injury. So, you know, there's proper ways to lift and so forth, and Karen can teach you how to do that. But I think that, you know, I think if that's something I can add to your education today, those are the most frequent types of injuries that I see in workers' comp claims.
So while Darby
Is there any other questions?
Yeah, while he's looking over those things, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in with a question or two. I would say put them in the chat, but my chat box has vanished on me again. Sure, it's there somewhere. So jump in with any questions.
You know, one of the questions I see here is, what is documentation composed of? Usually there's a medical history. There is chief complaints. There's an examination where they document whatever findings that the doctor makes. And then there's an assessment where they make the diagnoses, or Karen, what's it called when they make a diagnosis to rule out, but it's not confirmed?
Essentially, we just say ruling out.
Yeah, there's a name for it, but anyway, so you know, you're going to have your diagnosis, your suspected diagnosis, and then there's going to be usually some sort of analysis by the doctor and recommendation section, which is kind of the analysis and recommendation section of the report, and then they will also document the referrals. Okay, so those are the components of a medical report.
So I had a question on those, Darby.
Yeah.
Is it better to be putting it into medicalese and using technical terms like femur or tibula fibula, or is it better to say lower leg, upper leg?
I think that you're better to use terms of art, because it's not, listen, it's my job to figure out what a spondylolisthesis is. Okay. It's my job to figure that out. Okay. I think you have to use your medical terminology, you know, because they have specific meanings, you know, but I mean, I don't see doctors trying to dumb down reports for me. Okay. It's my job to raise my level of knowledge to them. They don't need to lower their knowledge to me. Okay. Because those terms have very specific meanings, just like in law. Like we have terms of art in the practice of law. Okay. And they have very specific meanings. So I think, yes, go with the terms of art within your profession and let us lay people figure out what they mean. Because, and the reason why too is, like, you know, I can read a report and I can kind of know what's going on, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not an EMT. I'm not a medical professional, you know. So what we have to do as lay people is get these reports in the hands of medical professionals like independent medical examiners, doctors, physicians, and so forth, and let them figure out what these reports really mean. Okay?
Good. And I know this is not as much of an issue now that we have the computers, but I was in a deposition many, many years ago, and I'm not a great speller. And it was actually brought up, oh, you misspelled things. Because you misspell things, does that mean your care was maybe subpar? And I had to say, no, really, I have dyslexia and I misspell things. The care is good, dyslexia bad. So
well, that brings up a good point, because really, Karen, what you're talking about there is credibility.
correct.
Okay. When I talk about credibility, I always kind of refer to that. There's this movie came out in the 90s called The Insider with Dustin. It was Dustin Hoffman, who was playing a 60 Minutes producer, and Russell Crowe was a tobacco scientist that had damning information about the tobacco companies and so forth. And basically the movie is about this scientist this tobacco scientist that blew the whistle on the tobacco industry. And they were trying to make cigarettes become more addictive. And so his testimony was going to cost these tobacco companies millions and millions and millions of dollars. And he was right about his opinions and so forth and his knowledge. So what did they do? They went after his credibility. Okay. So, in any sort of medical litigation, credibility is huge. It's one of the most important things. And credibility is, are you believable or not? So what they were trying to do, Karen, with you, is was it an insurance attorney or who was it that was questioning your spelling?
It was an insurance attorney.
Okay, there you go. Okay, so I can tell you without knowing a dang thing about your case that you probably documented some fairly serious injuries of that person that was involved in that accident. And that insurance company did not like what you had to say. So what they tried to do is make you look like you were unskilled or whatever, and they went after your credibility. Okay. Now, I don't know. I think getting the information correct is more important than the spelling, but obviously, it probably helps if it's spelled right, but you're not lawyers, you're EMTs, you're hands-on. So what I would say is worry about the medicine, get the information correct, and if it's spelled right, great. If it's not, well, that's okay.
Sounds good. I like that.
And
yeah, now that we're on computers, we can spell check everything.
Yeah. But, credibility is huge. And, it's one of the biggest factors of every case that we have. So, and the documenting the injuries timely goes to credibility. So, let's say that this person says they hurt 3 body parts in this accident. If that's the truth, and only one of those 3 injuries are documented in that EMT report, now, because you failed to adequately document the injuries, this injured person looks like they're lying when really they're not. Okay. So by accurately documenting these records, you're protecting the credibility of the injured party. Okay. Let's see, what else do we have here? Looks like we covered most of this.
I think we got a lot of them. Any questions come up as Darby is speaking? This is your chance to talk to an attorney for free.
If you guys have any other legal questions, if I'm knowledgeable in that area, I could answer your questions. One of the questions here was, does it depend on whose fault it was when it comes to insurance money claims and personal injury claims? That's a really good question. In workers' comp claims, fault is not an issue. Okay. So the issue is, were you injured within the course and scope of your employment? And did the workplace provide a special hazard that caused your injury? Okay. So fault really doesn't factor into a workers' comp claim unless there's what we call a safety rule violation. A safety rule violation is where, like, let's say you're working on your construction site and you're building a high-rise building and you're not wearing your hard hat and something falls out of the sky and hits you in the head. That would be a safety rule violation. Okay. If that happens in Colorado, your wage loss is reduced by 50%. But otherwise, fault is really not an issue in a workers' comp claim. However, fault is absolutely an issue in a car accident case, a products liability case, premises liability case, medical malpractice case. Fault is the centerpiece. So fault is, I have a duty to act reasonably. I did not do so. I breached my duty to act reasonably, thereby causing an injury. So you have duty, breach, causation, and injury. And so the breach of the duty that caused the injury is the fault that then exposes that person to the lawsuit. Okay. But in Colorado, in a workers' comp claim, if your employer is at fault for your accident, you do not get to sue your employer for negligence because they have workers' comp. Workers' comp is what's called the exclusive remedy, and it is your only legal option to pursue damages for your injuries if your employer was at fault for your accident. That's very frustrating for a lot of people. If they have a negligent employer and then that causes them an injury, a lot of injured workers have a really hard time digesting the fact that they really cannot hold their employer accountable for that.
Kind of a random question, but it still relates. I've heard a few cases to where, like, an ambulance gets crashed into or an ambulance crashes into something else. What happens in, like, that situation?
Well, that's a very good question because you have a workers' comp claim. If you're, let's say, you're an EMT and you are involved in a car accident while you're driving an ambulance, first of all, you're on the job. Okay. So that's a workers' comp claim. Now, if you were at fault for the accident, then the insurance company that insures your vehicle, the ambulance or the employer's insurance, then they would defend that lawsuit being brought by the injured party. But let's say that you're driving an ambulance and some other person runs a red light and runs into you and causes you to have injuries. So obviously you have a workers' comp claim, but then you would also have a lawsuit against the person that ran the red light and their auto insurance. Okay. And let's say that, and this is really important. It's not, this is just good information. Let's say that the person that ran the red light did not have insurance on their vehicle. Okay. There is this thing called uninsured motorist. So when you purchase your auto insurance on your personal vehicle, you're required to have $25,000 in insurance in case you cause an accident, but you can, excuse me, you can also buy what's called uninsured motorist coverage, which provides coverage to you if the other person does not have insurance. Okay. So if you go to my website, hoggattlaw.com, there's a page about this on there. But when you guys insure your vehicles, you should also purchase what's called uninsured motorist coverage, which would protect you from somebody that doesn't have insurance. Okay, so let's say in that scenario that, you're off work for a year and you have $100,000 in medical bills. And this guy that ran the red light doesn't have insurance. Well, you're going to get coverage from your workers' comp insurance company, but you should have been able to sue the guy, and now you can't because he doesn't have any money. But if you have that uninsured motorist coverage, that will your insurance, your auto insurance company will provide you with money for that accident as if they insured the at-fault party. And also, when you get that uninsured motorist, you also at the same time are purchasing this what's called underinsured motorist. So it's the same concept, only this time the guy that ran the red light had $25,000 in insurance. So he had insurance, and you're going to get that $25,000. However, if you have $150,000 in medical bills and he only has $25,000 in insurance, then who's going to pay the other $125,000? Well, when you purchase that uninsured motorist, you also get underinsured motorist. So the other guy's insurance would cover the first $25,000, and then your underinsured motorist would cover the other $125,000 in medical bills, depending upon how much insurance you bought. So if you only bought $50,000 in underinsured, then the other guy would pay you $25,000 and your underinsured would pay you $50,000. And typically, the older you get and the more money you make and the more assets you have, the more insurance you need. Okay. So anyway, I think you all should check your insurance, talk to your parents or whoever about your auto insurance, and make sure that you have underinsured, uninsured motorist coverage, and also what they call medical payments coverage. Medical payments coverage is insurance connected to your car that pays your medical bills if you get in a car accident. So let's say that you have a health insurance policy that has a $5,000 deductible and you get in a car accident. Well, if you have that medical payments coverage, then your car insurance will cover the first $5,000 of your medical, which would cover your deductible, and then your health insurance would cover the rest. So what you want when you purchase this car insurance, and everybody should look at this, it's very important. There's a lot of bad drivers out there, okay? There's a lot of traffic, and everybody's moving to Colorado. So you want to have underinsured, uninsured motorist and medical payments coverage on your car insurance, okay? And then the other thing, too, that you guys can look at that would be helpful once you get out into the workforce, because you're working, physically versus sitting behind a desk. Let's say that you get hurt playing softball over the weekend and you can't go back to work the next day. You also want to look at getting some disability insurance. So anytime you are working with your body, you want to insure yourself in case something happens to you and you cannot work. If it happens at work, work comp pays for it. But if it happens at home, you have insurance policies like AFLAC where you can get benefits in case you're not able to go to work.
All right. Good stuff.
Have you ever heard of a 1099 medical worker? Because I know there's a company down in Denver that hires EMTs and stuff, and they do contract work for like set medics and everything. But those workers are 1099, so they don't have insurance, or they don't have liability insurance through the company. So, what's your take on that?
Well, it's risky to work as a 1099 employee. So basically, a 1099, for those people that don't know what that is, a 1099 is a tax document that you receive if you have worked for somebody else, not as an employee, but as an independent contractor. Okay, so if you're an employee, at the end of the year, you get a W-2 because you're an employee. That shows how much money you made from King Soopers or whatever. Okay, but if you are doing independent contractor work, instead of getting a W-2 showing all the taxes and insurance that your employer took out, your paychecks, if you're a 1099, that means you're an independent contractor. Now, Okay, if you're an independent contractor, that means that you work for yourself. Okay, you are your employer. That means that you have to provide your own insurance, you have to provide your own taxes or pay your own taxes. Okay, I would be very skeptical as an EMT. I really think 1099 employment is kind of sketchy. A lot of times I see it in the construction trades, and people think, oh, this is great. Nobody's going to take taxes out of my check. Well, that doesn't mean that you don't owe the taxes. And it also means that you're uninsured. So if you work as a 1099 employee, you had better have workers' comp insurance on yourself. And you should probably also get some disability insurance. And you need to take a certain percentage out of those checks every month and be prepared to send it to the IRS. If you have an employer that's trying to pay you 1099, I would be very skeptical because they're trying to pass their responsibilities to provide workers' comp insurance and liability insurance and pay your unemployment taxes and your payroll taxes, your Social Security and Medicare. They're passing all of that on to you. And if you do decide to work as a 1099, you better be getting paid more. Because let's say that the going rate is $20 an hour for a W-2 employee. If you're going to do that same job as a 1099, you better be getting paid a lot more money than that. Because you have to take what you make and then go buy your own insurance and pay your own taxes. That's a red flag.
So if you're a 1099 employee, like I didn't even realize all the implications that come with that because I'm a 1099 employee. But like, do you like if you make under a certain amount per year, what is the tax implications with that?
Well, typically, okay, you're on to something there. You're right. Okay, that most people that make, let's say, I think it's $12,000 a year and less, you're probably not paying any federal income tax. Okay, but you still have to pay your Social Security taxes and whatnot. So Sasha, where are you working? What type? You don't have to tell me your employer, but what type of job are you doing?
I work at a ranch, so I do all the animal care and property maintenance.
Okay. Now the ranching community, that's a high risk job. They're probably not paying you very much, and you're probably taking a fairly substantial risk doing that job because ranching is dangerous. And if you were to get hurt on that ranch and they were paying you as a 1099, you're not going to get workers' comp. You're not going to get your wages replaced. You're not going to get your medical bills paid for. So yeah, anytime you're doing 1099, especially when it's physically demanding work, you should be very, very skeptical. Go find another job. And make sure they have insurance. I come from a ranching family, okay? Listen, I love ranchers, but they don't, they're not making a lot of money, and they can't afford to pay people, $15 an hour. I mean, people that work on a ranch are working 16-hour days. There's just not enough money. And I mean, ranching seems to be an area where they don't properly insure people. Okay. And I've represented several of these people. I have a guy right now who was a pen rider, and he was riding a horse in the winter, and the water tank that the cows were drinking out of, it had snowed, and the water tank had overflown, and so it was like an ice skating rink in this pen. And this cowboy, his horse lost his footing, and the horse landed on top of him. He landed on the ice, the horse landed on his hip and he slammed his head into the fence post. And that was circling back to the documentation issue, that was a case where this is a perfect example. So what happened with him was he went to the emergency room and he had some orthopedic issues in addition to a rather substantial brain injury. And he told the doctors, well, the report said that there was no brain injury, okay? And the first several doctors didn't even document it. What saved him, because the insurance company refused to pay for his brain injury, was that his employer, who had filled out an accident report the day of the accident, documented that he hit his head on the fence post. And that was the only document that showed it. And we were able to win that case because the employer, not the medical provider, properly documented it. And the thing about brain injuries is people don't always know they have a brain injury. So they don't even know to tell the EMT, hey, I have a brain injury, because they're probably not thinking straight. And so a lot of brain injuries get missed by doctors. But if you know the symptoms of a brain injury, you can figure it out. Hey, the guy hit his head and he's got ringing in his ears. Okay, well, he probably has a brain injury. Or he's got double vision and he hit his head. Well, that's a sign of a brain injury. Or he can't remember the accident and he hit his head. Well, that's a sign of, amnesia, which is a symptom. What else do you guys want to know?
Jump right in. We've got our chance with him.
Even if you have something that's not medical related and you want to ask if I can help you, I'll do my best. I would say to you guys, this has nothing to do with my practice, but I think that you're very smart pursuing your education. I know that these times are very bizarre with COVID and whatnot. I will say that investing in my education was the single most financially beneficial decision I ever made. Okay. The cost of education is a lot higher now than it was when I was going to college back in the 80s and 90s. But I think investing in your education is really smart. And I think you guys are doing the right thing by going in a profession where you're going to be helping people. And I think that you will derive a tremendous amount of self-pride and self-worth by doing that. And even if you don't get rich doing it, knowing that you help save lives is going to give you so much pride in yourself. You're going to garner so much respect from the people in the community that know that you're working these long hours and missing time from your families to save people's lives. And so I just really want to commend you all for choosing this potential occupation, and I encourage you to follow through with it. There were times during my education where I wanted to quit. In fact, I decided to quit law school after my first year. And then the weekend before law school started for my second year, I had an epiphany that I was making this huge mistake. And I called the dean of the law school and begged her to take me back, and she let me go to school. So even if you have struggles with your education, maybe you failed a test or something, just don't quit. Don't quit. Just keep going. And once you get out of school and you're helping people, you're going to feel really good about what you're doing.